You don't shatter the way the world imagines. You don't scream. You don't slam doors. The breaking point of an empath is quieter, stranger, and far more unsettling. Picture this: the dim light of the kitchen at 2 a.m., a clock ticking too loudly, your throat dry, your pulse steady but heavy. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet in that silence, something inside you rearranges. The surface looks calm, but beneath, tectonic plates shift. This isn't compassion anymore. This is adaptation, and tonight, you finally stop being the mirror for someone else's wounds. The empath's threshold is not rage, it is realization. After months or years of bending, forgiving, excusing, and softening your edges, the body keeps the score. Jung would have called this an eruption of the self, bursting out of the prison of the persona. The persona is that polite mask you learn to wear to be accepted, to be liked, to be safe. But masks grow heavy. You start to forget who is underneath, and the soul has limits. When the empath reaches them, the response is not theatrical rebellion, but a vanishing. You pull your energy back, not in vengeance, but in survival. The narcissist never sees it coming, because they never saw you in the first place. For the narcissist, control is oxygen. They live in illusions, projection, distortion, possession. They mistake love for ownership, connection for conquest. So long as you remained their mirror, their image of omnipotence stayed intact. You absorbed their wounds, excused their cruelty, carried their shadows. They believed you existed for them. They mistook your silence for agreement, your patience for weakness. But the empath's snap is not a scream. It is a door closing. One day, the energy they fed on is simply gone, and what remains is their own reflection. Raw, terrifying, unmasked. I have seen this pattern unfold in myths and in daily lives alike. It is archetypal. The healer entangled with the tyrant. The mirror shattered in silence. The empath is not born to absorb endlessly. Sensitivity is not medicine unless it is paired with truth. The soul withdraws its projections. The energy collapses inward, and the first step toward sovereignty begins. This is the quiet vanishing. It is less explosion, more implosion, and in that implosion, something ancient stirs. The will to stop bleeding into someone else's story. You may not even recognize it at first. Perhaps you wake up one morning and realize you don't care about their approval anymore. Maybe you stop explaining yourself. Maybe you stop answering every message. Maybe you stop rehearsing excuses in your head. Small, invisible gestures, but they mark the seismic shift. To the narcissist, it feels like betrayal. To you, it feels like oxygen. This threshold is not clean. There is guilt, confusion, a lingering voice that says, "Wasn't I supposed to fix them?" But deeper still, there is another voice, the one you've silenced for years. It whispers, "Enough." That whisper is the true beginning. Not revenge, not performance, but the first return to yourself. As this story unfolds, remember, the empath's snap is not an end, but a passage. It is the initiation into remembering who you were before you became a mirror. And it always begins with this, the threshold, the quiet vanishing. So as you sit here listening, pause for a moment. Notice where you feel stretched thin. Notice the room you are in, the hour on the clock. That awareness itself is a doorway. The empath's awakening starts not with drama, but with noticing. And when you notice, you cannot unknow. The empath disappears not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. The vanishing is not punishment. It is preservation. And it sets the stage for what follows. The slow erosion of self when kindness is mistaken for self-erasure. That is where we turn next. You thought kindness would keep you safe. You thought compassion would bridge every gap, soothe every storm, heal every wound. But slowly, almost invisibly, kindness became camouflage. What the world applauded as empathy was, in truth, the slow erasure of yourself. It begins with small compromises. You let them interrupt. You tell yourself it's not worth a fight. You let them twist words into knives, then soften the edges by excusing it as stress, as childhood scars, as trauma. You swap boundaries for explanations, and every time you swallow your no, the mask of persona grows heavier. Jung called the persona a mask built to protect us, to earn belonging. But when the mask hardens, it suffocates the self beneath it. You wear a smile that no longer belongs to you. Over time, this performance of kindness becomes the only role you know. The empath, once radiant, becomes a ghost in their own life. You walk through rooms and do not recognize your reflection. You nod and say, "I understand," even as your chest tightens and your breath shortens. You confuse boundaries with selfishness, mistaking exhaustion for compassion. The body begins to revolt. Headaches that linger, fatigue that no rest cures, dreams filled with drowning or endless corridors with no exit. These aren't random. They are the psyche's alarm bells, signaling that the soul is nearing collapse. What you forget in this cycle is yourself. You forget the taste of your own desires. You forget what brings you joy when no one else is watching. You forget the voice inside that once whispered, "I need, I want, I am." The forgetting is not benign. It is a psychic death. Jung would have called it participation in a drama not of your own making, a theater of shadows where you play the healer. But the script was never yours. The narcissist thrives in this forgetting. They survive on mirrors, on projection. To them, your self-erasure is convenient. It keeps the illusion intact. They do not have to change. They do not have to face themselves. They only need you to keep shrinking, to keep absorbing, to keep dying slowly while calling it love. But here is the paradox. Even as you forget yourself, the body remembers. Somewhere deep in your cells, the memory of wholeness stirs. The unconscious whispers through symbols. A lion appears in a dream, roaring behind a gate. A river floods its banks. Fire rages through a house you no longer recognize. These images are not random. They are summons. They remind you that compassion without discernment is not compassion. It is fear disguised as virtue, fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear that you are unworthy unless you are useful. These fears masquerade as kindness, but they drain you of your essence. You become smaller and smaller until one day you realize you cannot shrink any further. And that realization is the seed of awakening. When kindness becomes self-erasure, the empath's story begins to fracture. You sense it in your bones. Something inside you whispers that survival at this cost is no survival at all. The soul has limits, and when those limits are reached, forgetting gives way to remembering, often in ways you never anticipated. So ask yourself, where have you mistaken endurance for love? Where have you excused cruelty as pain in disguise? Where have you silenced your own truth under the name of compassion? The answers are not comfortable, but they are holy. For each forgotten part of yourself waits to be reclaimed. The narcissist may never notice this erosion. To them, your self-forgetting is ordinary, expected. But for you, it is unbearable. And when the soul can no longer carry the weight of suppression, something ancient stirs. That stirring will not be polite. It will not ask permission. It will erupt, not outward, but inward. And that eruption is where the shadow enters. This is where the descent begins. The shadow revolt, the fire long denied, the grief long buried. You will discover that forgetting was never the end, but the threshold into remembering. And the remembering starts with rage, with grief, with truth. That is where our journey leads next. There comes a night when silence no longer works. The empath who has swallowed their voice for years suddenly feels a surge, not of hatred, but of raw force. It is not a tantrum, not a calculated act of vengeance. It is the shadow, long denied, demanding its place at the table. Jung called the shadow the repository of everything the persona rejects. Rage, grief, selfishness, desire, sovereignty. And when you have spent a lifetime cutting these pieces off, they do not return politely. They arrive like thunder breaking a stagnant sky. This is the Shadow Revolt. For decades, perhaps, you were trained to be good, polite, forgiving, endlessly patient. But goodness without wholeness is just obedience. One day, in the marrow of your being, you realize, I am done obeying. The rage you thought was dangerous reveals itself as sacred. The grief you thought would drown you instead becomes the river that carries you home. Even selfishness, long condemned, becomes holy, a reminder that you are allowed to exist, to take up space, to matter. The narcissist recoils at this revolt. They accuse you of changing, of becoming cold, cruel, distant. But the truth is the opposite. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming yourself. You are no longer the mirror that reflects their grandeur. You are the flame that illuminates their void. For the narcissist, this is terror. Their illusion cracks. The supply vanishes. They rage, they plead, they threaten. But the spell is broken. Dreams, too, bear witness to this revolt. You see fire consuming old houses. You walk through endless corridors and finally find an exit. You meet animals, lion, serpent, eagle, each bearing messages of power, transformation, and vision. The unconscious rejoices. It is no longer content with survival. It wants wholeness. And wholeness requires shadow. But make no mistake, the revolt is messy. You may cry until your body shakes. You may feel shame for anger that was always your birthright. You may long for the narcissist even as you walk away, because they mirrored not only their wounds, but also your abandoned child. The part of you that learned love was earned through sacrifice. That child will surface now, tender and frightened, asking, "Will you still love me if I am not useful?" Your answer must be yes. This revolt is not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It is reclamation. It is the empath saying, I will not be consumed. I will not erase myself to keep the peace. I will not mistake cruelty for love. You stop rescuing. You start remembering. You reclaim the voice that whispered no and was silenced for decades. You let yourself feel anger without apology, grief without shame, need without explanation. The narcissist cannot follow you here. To them, shadow is poison. To you, it becomes medicine. Their kingdom trembles not because you fight them, but because you stop playing the role they scripted. You leave the stage. You walk into the backstage corridors of your own psyche and meet the exiled cast. Rage, grief, desire, sovereignty. You embrace them as family, not enemies, and this changes everything. What was once projection, seeing the narcissist as the tyrant who must be healed, turns inward. You see the pattern. You were drawn to them not by accident, but by archetype. They embodied the wound you carried from childhood. That love meant loss. That visibility meant danger. That worth meant usefulness. By daring to revolt, you break the contract. You stop mistaking trauma for destiny. The revolt is terrifying, yes, but it is also sacred. It purifies. It dissolves lies. It cuts cords. It demands that you feel, at last, what you were taught to bury. And in that feeling, you do not disintegrate. You integrate. This is the threshold of individuation. You are no longer only a persona, nor only a vessel of other people's pain. You are a self in the making. The implosion of the empath's snap clears the stage for the authentic self to rise. That is where our path turns next. The snap not as collapse, but as individuation. The snap is not a collapse, it is a crossing. What looks, from the outside, like disappearance or withdrawal is, in truth, the birth of something entirely new. Jung called it individuation, the slow, often painful dissolution of the false self, so the authentic self can emerge. For the empath, the implosion is not destruction, but reassembly. After years of scattering energy outward, you begin the spiral inward, gathering the fragments of who you always were. Think of it this way. For years you rehearsed a role, the good one, the healer, the listener, the forgiver. That role was useful. It kept you safe. It earned you belonging. But roles are costumes, and eventually, the fabric wears thin. The empath's snap tears the costume at the seams. Beneath it is not emptiness, but essence. And when essence surfaces, everything you thought you were begins to shift. This individuation is messy. The psyche does not reorganize politely. You may feel guilt for saying no, shame for choosing rest, fear for holding a boundary. Yet each of these moments is not regression, it is initiation. Each no is a brick laid in the foundation of sovereignty. Each pause to breathe is a signal to your nervous system. I am safe now, even without their approval. The narcissist cannot comprehend this shift. They interpret your reclamation as betrayal. They call it coldness, cruelty, abandonment. But this reveals more about their illusion than about your truth. They cannot see you because they never did. They only saw a mirror, a projection. When the mirror falls, they rage at the loss of supply. But for you, the implosion is liberation. You are no longer defined by their gaze. This is where Jung's language becomes vital. The self is not the ego. The ego is the fragile identity that clings, performs, and fears dissolution. The self is the deeper center, the quiet axis of the psyche, the place that just is. When the empath begins to root in the self, they discover a power not based on control, but on presence. It is steady, unmoved by manipulation, clear without cruelty. Symbols of individuation often appear in this stage. Dreams of bridges, thresholds, gates. The psyche speaks in images, reminding you that you are crossing into new terrain. A lion may appear to remind you of courage. A serpent may shed its skin to symbolize transformation. A river may return to flow, carrying away stagnation. These are not just dreams. They are archetypal signposts, guiding you home. Integration means more than insight. It requires action. You begin to test your new voice in the real world, speaking a need without apology, choosing solitude over chaos, sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it away. Each small act reinforces the truth. You no longer exist to rescue, to perform, to be consumed. You exist to live. The empath's individuation is also paradoxical. You remain sensitive. You still feel deeply, but sensitivity no longer drains you. It becomes a resource directed inward first. You learn discernment, when to open, when to close, when to speak, when to stay silent. Empathy without boundaries once broke you. Empathy with sovereignty now remakes you. This transformation is not about erasing pain. It is about integrating it. The grief, the rage, the loneliness, they are not banished, but embraced as parts of you. Wholeness is not perfection. It is inclusion. Every rejected fragment is welcomed back. And with each return, you feel less like a ghost and more like a whole person. The narcissist may hover, testing your resolve. They may send apologies laced with hooks or threats disguised as love. But individuation means you no longer play the game. You recognize the bait and decline. Not with anger, not with sermons, but with quiet refusal. Your presence no longer feeds their illusion, and so they must seek elsewhere. And so, individuation becomes the great reversal. Where once you lived to be needed, you now live to be true. Where once you gave to survive, you now give from overflow. Where once you feared being too much, you now inhabit your full being without apology. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. The empath's snap, then, is not an end, but a threshold. It ushers in the messy, terrifying, and sacred work of individuation. And as you grow into this new center, something larger stirs. Individuation is never purely personal. It echoes outward, touching the collective. That is where we turn next. The ripple effect of one empath's awakening on the entire psychic field. When one soul awakens, the world trembles. Individuation is never just a private act. Jung insisted that the unconscious is collective as well as personal, woven with threads of ancestral memory and archetypal patterns. So when an empath snaps, when they withdraw from false sacrifice and reclaim the self, their transformation ripples far beyond their own skin. It becomes mythic correction, a disruption in the fabric of generational illusion. Think of it. The empath is often born into a family system already hungry for mirrors. From childhood, they learn to read the room before they can read a book. They become the emotional sponge, the tuning fork, the one who absorbs tension so others can remain comfortable. This is not coincidence. It is inheritance. The empath carries wounds that did not begin with them. And when they finally awaken, they are not just liberating themselves. They are breaking ancestral contracts. Those contracts sound familiar. Love means sacrifice. Your worth is measured by usefulness. Peace at any cost. These scripts have been passed like sacred curses through generations. When the empath snaps, those scripts collapse. It is as though one thread is pulled from a tapestry, and suddenly the entire pattern begins to unravel. Children who once watched you shrink now see you hold boundaries. Friends who once relied on your silence now hear you speak truth. Even strangers sense a shift in your field. You are no longer signaling availability for pain. You are emitting the frequency of truth. This ripple reaches further still. In a society intoxicated by narcissism, performance over presence, domination over connection, consumption over intimacy, the awakened empath becomes a quiet rebel. To feel deeply in a numb world is resistance. To refuse manipulation is revolution. To love without erasure is liberation. Your healing is not merely personal survival, it is cultural defiance. The imagery of dreams confirms this collective echo. You may dream of rivers turning course, of earthquakes shaking foundations, of gates opening into radiant cities. These symbols are not just about you, they are about us. They reveal that your individuation participates in a broader shift, the move from a culture of exploitation toward one of authenticity. Each empath who awakens becomes a lighthouse, not the frantic rescuer of every passing ship, but a steady beam reminding others of the shore within themselves. And here lies the paradox. You never asked to be a torchbearer. You only wanted to breathe. But the moment you chose authenticity over illusion, your very being became testimony. Others feel it, even if they cannot name it. They sense in your presence that there is another way to live, without performing, without obeying, without shrinking. And slowly they begin to question their own scripts. The narcissist, of course, does not interpret it this way. They feel the loss of supply as abandonment, betrayal, insult. They may smear you, manipulate others, or rush to find a new empath to mirror their wounds. Yet even this cycle testifies to the truth. Your absence reveals their dependency. By stepping away, you expose the fragility of their kingdom. And in doing so, you release not only yourself, but those watching from the margins. Those who quietly wonder if they too can break free. This ripple is archetypal. In myths, the hero's descent and return never heals only themselves. Persephone's escape from the underworld brings spring to the earth. The goddess, remembering her power, rebalances the cosmos. The empath, reclaiming their self, echoes this same rhythm. Private awakening becomes collective renewal. The cost is real. To break contracts of silence means grieving those who preferred you silent. To refuse inherited scripts means carrying the discomfort of others who still perform them. Yet this cost is holy. For every act of integrity plants a seed in the collective field, and those seeds grow, often unseen, until one day an entire forest of awakened souls rises. So let yourself feel the weight of this. Your healing is not just your own. It is a summons, a correction, a gift to the world. Each time you hold a boundary, you teach. Each time you speak truth, you echo into generations. Each time you love without abandoning yourself, you rewrite the story of what love means. This is the ripple of the empath's awakening, and it leads directly to the next stage. Sovereignty without vengeance. You no longer fight to prove, nor vanish to punish. You stand quietly immovable in the truth of your being. That is where our journey turns next. Sovereignty arrives quietly. It does not roar. It does not demand applause. After the revolt, after the grief, after the long descent into shadow, there comes a moment when the empath stands, not to fight, not to prove, but simply to be. This is sovereignty without vengeance, authority without domination. In this state, distance is not cruelty, it is clarity. The empath no longer rushes to fix every broken bond, no longer confuses forgiveness with reunion. They understand now, compassion can bless from afar. Forgiveness can coexist with boundaries. Love no longer requires erasure. Jung spoke often of individuation as the integration of opposites. And here the empath integrates perhaps the greatest paradox of all. To be soft and firm, open and discerning, present and untouchable. The narcissist, accustomed to drama, cannot comprehend this stillness. They expect either compliance or conflict. They know how to manipulate arguments, how to seduce with apologies, how to weaponize guilt. But when the empath no longer reacts, the entire script disintegrates. Silence becomes unshakable. Boundaries become steady, not walls but sacred thresholds. The narcissist is left with their own reflection, the one thing they fear most. This sovereignty does not mean the empath never feels the pull of old patterns. Triggers still whisper, memories still ache. But instead of collapsing into them, The empath now recognizes them as echoes. The body remembers, yes, but the soul has learned to choose differently. You can sit across from someone who once consumed your energy and feel the tug without obeying it. You can notice the temptation to explain yourself and let the explanation die unspoken. That choice, that restraint, is sovereignty in action. And sovereignty reshapes love. Love is no longer performance, no longer sacrifice. It softens without surrendering the self. It listens without absorbing pain. It gives without disappearing. It receives without guilt. In this way, the empath becomes paradox embodied. Tender yet unyielding. Kind yet unmanipulable. This paradox is not contradiction. It is wholeness. Culturally, this wholeness is radical. We are taught that to love is to obey, to forgive is to return, to give is to exhaust. The sovereign empath defies all of that. Their presence alone teaches another way. Children watch and learn that boundaries are not rejection, but safety. Friends witness that self-respect and compassion can coexist. Strangers feel the field shift when they encounter someone who does not bend for approval, who does not vanish in the face of disapproval. Sovereignty is not dominance. It is not about ruling over others. It is about ruling within. The steady alignment of psyche, shadow, and self. The inner child who once begged for love is held with tenderness. The shadow once feared is embraced as sacred fire. The persona once overworked is allowed to rest. All parts of the self sit at the same table, not competing, but belonging. This is why the empath becomes immovable, not because they are hardened, but because they are whole. The narcissist may linger at the edges, baffled by this transformation. They may try again, sending praise or threats, dangling old hooks. But the sovereign empath no longer plays the game. They no longer define themselves against the narcissist at all. The story has shifted. The narcissist is no longer the antagonist. They are simply irrelevant. The empath does not leave in fury nor return in guilt. They walk their own path, steady and quiet, and this path is luminous. When you are sovereign, your sensitivity is no longer a liability. It becomes a gift, finally directed inward. Intuition guides you, not into chaos, but into alignment. Empathy fuels art, teaching, presence, not rescue missions. You become dangerous in the best way, not because you harm, but because you cannot be harmed by the games that once consumed you. This is sovereignty without vengeance. It is the culmination of the snap. Not as collapse, not as exile, but as return. You are no longer a mirror for someone else's illusion. You are a mirror of truth itself. And from this place, you begin to walk with new companions. Those who resonate, not those who consume. Yet even sovereignty is not the final word. Beyond the quiet authority of the individual lies a deeper horizon. How this integration transforms not just your relationships, but your very sense of existence. That last stage, where wisdom replaces wound and wholeness becomes daily practice, is where we go next. What remains after the storm is not ruin, but renewal. Sovereignty has given you the ground beneath your feet, and now wholeness begins to blossom. This stage is not loud or theatrical. It is a steady rhythm, the daily embodiment of everything you fought to reclaim. Before you lived in reaction, now you live in response. Before you gave to survive, now you give from overflow. Wholeness means that the pieces once scattered, childhood wounds, shadow fragments, silenced truths, are no longer at war. They sit together inside you like instruments in an orchestra. Different voices, one harmony. Jung described individuation as the sacred marriage of opposites. the union of conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, shadow and light. For the empath, this marriage feels like homecoming. You no longer search for completion in others because you are no longer split within yourself. In this wholeness, sensitivity remains, but it has changed texture. You still notice the subtle tremors in a room, still read unspoken emotions, still feel deeply. Yet these gifts no longer drain you. They are filtered through discernment. You sense pain without absorbing it, hear silence without losing yourself in it, love without dissolving. What once leaked outward as uncontained empathy now channels inward first, then flows outward with intention. Life itself begins to mirror this integration. Your relationships shift. Those who once thrived on your self-erasure fall away. They may accuse you of being different, harder, less available. In truth, you are simply whole. And in that wholeness, you attract not voids, but equals. People who meet you in resonance rather than dependency. Connection becomes not rescue, but exchange. Not survival, but celebration. Dreams shift as well. The endless corridors of entrapment dissolve. Now you walk through open fields, cross luminous bridges, meet figures of wisdom who hand you symbols of courage and trust. These dreams confirm what the waking soul already knows. The self has returned from exile, and with it, life regains its color. Culturally, too, your wholeness becomes a signal. In a world that rewards performance over presence, exploitation over authenticity, your simple act of being whole is disruptive. You are no longer a cog in the machinery of manipulation. You are a reminder that another way is possible. You embody what Jung called the archetype of the healed healer, not the rescuer who dies in the wounds of others, but the mystic who knows how to hold suffering without being consumed by it. Wholeness is not perfection. The shadow still rises. Old wounds still whisper. But now you meet them with awareness. You feel without drowning, remember without collapsing, speak without apology. Awareness creates choice, and choice sustains freedom. You are no longer hostage to reflexes built in childhood or scripts inherited from generations. You are the author now. And what of love? Love is transformed. It is no longer a desperate plea to be seen. It is no longer intensity mistaken for intimacy. Love becomes a practice of truth, listening without absorption, giving without erasure, receiving without guilt. It grows roots in honesty, not fantasy. It becomes paradox, tender yet firm, open yet discerning. This paradox is not a flaw. It is precisely what our age requires. In this way, the empath who once lived as a mirror becomes something else entirely. A lighthouse. Not the frantic rescuer of every lost ship, but a steady beam that shines because shining is its nature. You do not force. You do not chase. You do not plead. You simply radiate what you are. And in that radiance, others remember what they too have always been. This is the culmination of the empath's snap. Not collapse, not revenge, not disappearance into bitterness. Renewal, a sovereign wholeness that lives quietly, fiercely, authentically. And though the narcissist may never understand it, though society may resist it, the truth remains. When one empath awakens, the world shifts. From here, we enter the final movement of our journey, a closing reflection that gathers these threads into a single, resonant truth. The journey ends not with fireworks, but with a deep exhale. When the empath snaps, the narcissist may never see it coming, but the soul always did. What felt like collapse was, all along, a culmination, the final alignment of truths too long ignored. This was never about vengeance. It was about return. Return to the body, once abandoned in the name of peace. Return to the voice, once silenced in the name of harmony. Return to the self, once buried beneath masks and roles. The empath's path leads back, always back, to the place of origin. The still point, where wholeness hums quietly beneath every illusion. And here lies the paradox. Nothing outwardly spectacular may have changed. The same world still spins, the same memories still echo, the same wounds still whisper. But within, the axis has shifted. What once drained you now slides off. What once dictated your worth now sounds hollow. You do not need to explain. You do not need to prove. Your field speaks for you. Sovereignty, at last, is not about power over others. It is about power with yourself. It is the full reclamation of your psychic center. And in that center, there is no hunger for domination, no craving for revenge. There is presence. There is discernment. There is peace that does not cost you your life. Picture it. Once you carried a lantern for others, lighting their path at the expense of your own. Now you hold a mirror, and in it you see yourself clearly, not as broken, not as too much, not as unworthy, but as whole. That mirror is not for the narcissist, nor for the world. It is for you. It reminds you every day of what was always true. You are already enough. And so the cadence slows. The work continues. Yes, the shadow will rise again. Old voices will whisper again. But you are no longer hostage to them. You can listen without obeying. You can feel without drowning. You can love without disappearing. This is the quiet authority of wholeness. Let us land here gently with 3 short truths. I exist. I matter. I begin here. Take them as anchors. Whisper them when the old stories press in. Write them on the inside of your ribs. Let them remind you that individuation is not a single moment, but a practice, a spiral that returns you again and again to the center. And now, a gentle invitation. Within the next 24 hours, choose one small boundary to honor. Say no where you once stayed silent, and then offer yourself a blessing. One sentence only. Something like, I am safe when I stop being the mirror, because that is what this whole journey has been about. Not revenge, not spectacle, but embodiment. You are no longer theirs. You never were. You are your own. The tide has turned, the door in your bones has unlocked, and the sun, at last, has replaced the candle.